An unprecedented financial catastrophe is unfolding right before our eyes. With the U.S. government exceeding its $30 trillion debt ceiling, the nation is perilously close to a default that could go down in history as the most catastrophic blow to capitalism ever witnessed. The clock is ticking, and there may be only a few weeks left to delay this impending disaster, with the deadline looming as early as June 1st. This crisis could have catastrophic consequences that even the worst recessions in recent history, such as the crashes of 1929 and 2008, pale in comparison. In this video, we'll delve into the depths of this urgent situation and uncover 6 terrifying consequences that could devastate the lives of Americans if the U.S. defaults on its debt. The debt ceiling is a crucial cap on the amount of money the U.S. government can borrow from the Treasury. This money is essential for fulfilling vital obligations such as Social Security, federal employees, paying interest on the national debt, and even compensating our armed forces. However, here's the kicker. The U.S. government consistently spends more than it collects in taxes and revenue, leading to a persistent budget deficit. And that's why it finds itself in the position of needing to borrow massive sums of money in the first place. As of January 19th, the national debt skyrocketed over $31 trillion, surpassing the said borrowing limit of $31.381 trillion. To prevent a catastrophic default, the Treasury Department had to pull out all the stops and employ accounting maneuvers called extraordinary measures. These measures involve the temporary restriction of certain government investments, all in an attempt to ensure bills are paid and disaster is averted. However, the clock is ticking, and those measures to delay default could run out by early June. Even Treasury Secretary Janet L. Yellen has issued a grave warning to lawmakers that if the borrowing cap isn't raised or suspended, the United States could find itself cash-strapped by June 1st. And that means only one thing: default for the U.S. government. It's a high-stakes game with the fate of the entire nation hanging in the balance. And while breaches of the debt ceiling have occurred before, this time it's different. The opposition to raising the ceiling from Republican quarters is stronger than ever, and the Biden administration is facing severe obstacles to reaching an agreement. If an agreement isn't reached by June 1st and the U.S. government defaults, the consequences would be catastrophic, making the defaults of countries like Sri Lanka, Argentina, and Greece pale in comparison. So hold on tight and stay tuned as we dive into 6 terrifying consequences that could devastate the lives of Americans in the aftermath of a default. Number 6. Looming unemployment crisis. A potential debt default in the U.S. could trigger a devastating economic downturn that could unleash a tidal wave of unemployment. This would come at a time when the nation is grappling with surging interest rates and stubbornly high inflation, making it an incredibly precarious situation. The gravity of this unemployment crisis hinges on a crucial factor: how long the default persists. According to Moody's, even a mere week of default could snatch away close to 1 million jobs. Let that sink in. Unemployment rates would surge to around 5%, and the economy would contract by nearly 0.5%. It's a grim scenario that could shake the foundations of our financial stability, but sadly, that's just the tip of the iceberg. If this deadlock drags on for a painful 6 weeks, over 7 million jobs could be lost, causing the unemployment rate to soar beyond 8%. The situation would be dire, and the consequences of such a crisis would echo far beyond the immediate aftermath. Even a decade later, we would still feel the impact. Number 5. Increased borrowing costs. If the U.S. defaults on its debt, the risk of bondholders not receiving their money from the government would cause yields on U.S. treasuries to rise. And since interest rates on loans, credit cards, and mortgages often hinge on treasury yields, the consequences hit close to home. The cost of borrowing money and paying off existing debt would skyrocket, adding to the financial burden Americans are already shouldering from Federal Reserve rate hikes. It's like getting caught in a whirlwind of mounting expenses. Millions of families grappling to make ends meet, desperately trying to keep up with their payments, but ultimately facing the terrifying possibility of losing their homes or vehicles. But that's not all. Families and businesses would face another hurdle: securing lines of credit. Banks, feeling the pinch of higher borrowing costs, would become even more stringent in their loan approvals. It's a double whammy: reduced access to credit, making it harder for individuals and businesses to finance their goals and fuel economic growth. Number 4. Cutback in Social Security payments. If the U.S. defaults on its debt obligations, the $25 billion that is distributed weekly in government payments, including Social Security, would simply vanish into thin air. Those who depend on these payments would be left in a state of financial turmoil. For many of them, carrying on with their daily lives without the crucial financial assistance would be a monumental challenge. The impact would be devastating, affecting their ability to cover basic needs and maintain their quality of life. To truly understand the magnitude of this issue, consider this. Approximately 66 million retirees, disabled workers, and other individuals in the U.S. heavily depend on Social Security payments to cover their bills and expenses. That's an astounding 1 in every 5 Americans. In fact, for many of them, Social Security benefits are not just a supplementary income, but their primary source of financial support. According to the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, nearly 2/3 of beneficiaries rely on Social Security to meet at least half of their financial needs. And for a staggering 40% of recipients, these payments make up a staggering 90% of their total income. So the impact of a default on their lives would be absolutely devastating, leaving them vulnerable and unable to cope with the basic necessities of life. Number 3. Loss of Americans' savings. A default on the U.S. debt would not only impair the government's ability to meet its obligations, but it would also devastate Americans' investments and retirement savings. Investors would lose confidence, resulting in a catastrophic drop in stock prices, and retirement funds and savings accounts held by families across the nation would lose their value. For instance, during the 2011 debt ceiling debate, the S&P 500 index plunged 15%, and this was just a debate. Even if the debt ceiling impasse is resolved soon after a default, stocks could still lose up to a third of their value, which would wipe out around $12 trillion in household wealth, according to Moody's Analytics. The situation is becoming so serious that J.P. Morgan Chase has set up a war room to brainstorm contingency plans, as the government seems to lack a plan B if a default occurs. Number 2. Downgrade in rating. Currently, the U.S. holds an AA+ rating, which serves as a mark of confidence for lenders. However, the consequences of a U.S. default would be dire, potentially resulting in a downgrade to a restricted default rating. Such a downgrade would deal a major blow to the country's financial reputation, leading to higher borrowing costs for the government and making it more difficult to secure funds in the future. To grasp the gravity of this situation, let's examine a historical precedent. In 1979, during the Carter administration, the U.S. government defaulted on approximately $122 million, causing a delay in sending out around 4,000 Treasury checks. This singular default triggered a significant 60 basis point increase in Treasury bill interest rates, amplifying the cost of borrowing for the government and culminating in an estimated long-term expense of $12 billion. Now, envision the repercussions of a default involving trillions of dollars. The magnitude of the consequences would be far-reaching and substantially more impactful. Number 1. U.S. dollar would also feel the heat. As the world's preeminent safe asset and primary reserve currency, the U.S. dollar plays a pivotal role in international trade and finance. However, if the U.S. defaults on its debt obligations, confidence in the U.S. dollar would erode, triggering a chain reaction of economic and foreign policy implications with far-reaching effects. One major repercussion would be the opportunist stance taken by other nations, particularly China, who would seize the moment to challenge the dollar's dominance. They would actively promote their own currency as a viable alternative for global trade and financial transactions. In fact, the BRICS nations have already forged an agreement to diminish the dollar's influence, and a U.S. default would provide them with an ideal opening to advance their agenda. In the short term, a loss of confidence in the dollar would unleash chaos. It would have a profound impact on the global economy, disrupting supply chains, unsettling energy prices, and affecting our daily lives in ways we cannot ignore. A default on the debt ceiling is not a problem confined to a select few. It affects all Americans. Its repercussions would reverberate throughout the entire economy and have global implications. Economic experts from various backgrounds are in agreement. The consequences could be catastrophic, leading to widespread job losses and increased borrowing costs. Within a matter of weeks, trillions of dollars in household wealth could vanish, and the United States could plunge into an unprecedented recession. The mere threat of default has the potential to undermine recent economic progress, making it imperative that we refrain from using it as political leverage. It is of utmost importance that those in power work collaboratively to find a solution that ensures our financial commitments are honored and our economy can continue to flourish.